It is the 3rd of January, which means we are less than 3 months away from the end of our fantasy bingo. And as per usual, I'm behind. I'm over halfway through. I have 9 squares left to complete. Technically 8 because one of them isn't to read a book. It's the not a book square. So I've only got 8 books left to read for our fantasy, which is good because I think this time last year I had like 10. So I'm ahead of schedule, or at least ahead of my schedule. The goal for this video is to make some progress. There are some books I can't read yet because I'm waiting on my library holds to come in, and I'm not kind of stressed about hitting the goal by the end of March, but I thought it would be good to make some progress in January so that I can just read a few more books throughout February and March and be ready for the next round of Fantasy Bingo. So one of the squares that I have left to read, and one of the books I've already started, is The Way Spring Arrives and Other Stories, which is a translated collection of science fiction and fantasy by Chinese authors. I tend to read a full collection for the short stories square prompt, which is the hard mode. Someone's doing something outside. Just because I think it introduces you to a lot of different authors that you might not have necessarily got to read otherwise. I've read a couple of stories in this. One of them, the one that stands out the most, was about raising stars. I think it's the first story in the collection, and we have these baby stars that people are trying to train, and the kind of circumstances that brings up in the little village that they live in, and so I'm hoping to read a little bit more of this every single day and get through this collection because it's about 300 pages long. I then also have started Recipes for an Unexpected Afterlife by Destin J. Munden. This one I'm reading for the parent square, and for that square essentially there just needs to be a child that the main character is looking after in some way. They don't directly have to be a parent. I'm 10% of the way through that one at the moment, and so far we have our main character who was part of an undead army and essentially has been given retirement. Although he wasn't planning on taking retirement, it kind of comes unexpectedly for him, as he's made no longer undead. He's given back his ability to breathe. He now has a heartbeat again, and at the point that I'm at, he is literally now just figuring out that he has to find something to do with his life because he spent his whole life, or the majority of his life, fighting as a commander for this undead army. And the cover of it definitely doesn't give the vibe that it follows an orc who was once undead, so it's quite interesting, I think, to see where that one's going to go. Other than that, I'm hoping to maybe read 5 books for this video. The plan is just to see where I get to by the end of the month. As I said, I've got at least 2 books on hold from the library. I've got a few squares where I still don't know which book I'm reading because I've maybe started a book and then I've decided I don't want to continue reading it. So that's the tentative plan at the moment. I'll let you know when I read a bit more. It's past Christmas time, but all I can think to do is sing Christmas songs because it's snowing at the moment, and so I just have The Weather Outside is Frightful stuck in my head. Anyway, I've finished Recipes for an Unexpected Afterlife, my first finished read of 2026. I've given it 3 stars. I read one of Destin J. Munden's other works, I think last year, because it was a book that followed an orc, similar to this one, but I wasn't really that keen on the writing. I just couldn't jive with it even after the first chapter, so I never ended up finishing it. This one I think is a lot better written. It feels more edited, and I do wonder if that was partially because it was published under one of the Bindery imprints as opposed to being self-published, so it had a few more eyes on it. We follow, like I said, our main character. His name is Rotgor, or his assigned name is Rotgor, and the kind of world is that he and a series of other people were kind of forced into being undead, and then this lich came along and kind of saved them from this other evil ruler, and he is now able to retire because, as I said, the granddaughter of the kind of old Lich King is one of his close friends, and she wants him to have a life essentially. And so throughout this we meet other people. We meet Astra, who's the young girl who is an orphan, and they kind of start building a relationship. She's someone who kind of reminds him what it is to be alive again, in a sense, because he has now got the ability to eat back. He can taste food, and so when he's creating his restaurant, he's really kind of taking pleasure in the tastes that he hasn't been able to have for so long. And same thing to do with like him obviously having a heartbeat, him not necessarily having the same strength and magic that he had when he was undead, and all the experiences that he has with other people in the community. There is a overarching plot with his relationship with Astra, but also there is still an evil kind of lurking there. There's this faction that doesn't like people who are undead, even people like Rok'Gor who are no longer undead. They see them as not having a place in this society, see them as taking jobs and buildings and livelihoods and all of these sorts of things. And so there's that kind of background noise which goes on throughout the book, as well as a conflict that Rok'Gor has with someone who was in a similar position to him, and the kind of relationship that they have as well. Overall, like I said, I gave it a 3. I think that the story was fine. I think it was decently written. I think it was probably a little bit predictable in places, and there was elements of that I feel like when I was reading it I was like, okay, I knew that was happening. I knew that this conflict didn't just end here. Something else was coming, which is why it was a 3. But it was a decent start to the year. I've finished another book for the bingo, which is the most important thing. I also got a little bit further in The Way Spring Arrives and other stories. I've read about 100 more pages. The one story that really stuck out to me last night was one that follows a man who works for this game company, and he gets really obsessed with playing this game, which is about raising this child, and his work has been tasked with creating a holographic version because holotech is becoming this next big thing. His boss says to him, you should go and have a baby because we want you to lead this project and we want this to be even more realistic than the 2D game, so you need to go and have a baby so that you can make an accurate version of this game. And it's really horrific in that sense, but I think it was the one that really kind of like drew me in the most, when we have this man who essentially kind of coerces his partner into having a child, and the relationship that he has with the child, his own physical child, but then also the 2D and holographic game that he is creating, and how that basically blows up his life, is the one that definitely stuck out the most to me throughout all of them. There are some essays interspersed in here about science fiction and fantasy within China and things like that. I've read one of them already and I'm just about to read another before it goes into the story that's named, that the title of the book is taken from, and so I can feel myself kind of moving through them fairly quickly now. It's really interesting how so many of them seem to be more science fiction leaning. There was a lot of stuff about different types of technology, specifically like the kind of like holotech, and there's one that had a bit of time travel elements to it. But I'm enjoying these, so I'm looking forward to finishing this off. I don't actually know what book I'm going to pick up next yet. I think I might read A Song for Legends Lost. That is one that was released last year that popped up. It seems to have good reviews, but I haven't seen a lot of people talking about it, and so I would like to read that one. Originally I was going to read the, oh my god, I've forgotten what it's called. I'll put it here. This is for the generic title square, but A Song for Legends Lost also fits that, and so I think I'm going to prioritise that one over the other one because I did try and start that last year and just didn't have much luck. So that I think is going to be my next goal for the bingo, and then after that we'll see whatever I'm interested in picking up. I realised last night that there is another book that I could read for bingo. One of the squares that I still have left is the Hidden Gem Square, which is to read a book that's under 1,000 Goodreads ratings. And originally I was planning on picking up the Mary Sean Lee The Tale of the Dragon. I can't remember what it's called at this precise time because everyone on Reddit always talks about it. I've seen it literally recommended for the past 2 bingo boards, and I was like, oh, I guess I just have to pick it up. But the book that I'm currently reading that has to go back to the library in 5 days is The Mad Sisters of Essie. It has just over 400 ratings, and so since it has to go back to the library so soon, I'm going to switch out the book that I originally, The Sign of the Dragon, has just come back to me. So I'm going to switch out The Sign of the Dragon for The Mad Sisters of Essie. I'm about 20% of the way into it at the moment. We follow 2 sisters, Myung and Layla, who are on this giant whale where when they walk through doors, they enter new worlds, and Myung is desperate to leave. And she does end up getting to leave. And so I think the story is a lot about sisters wanting to reunite with each other. And one of the things that really drew me in was the fact that in the early chapters, we see these texts afterwards. They're like extracts from journal articles about the kind of myth of this Whale of Babel that the 2 sisters originally live in, and what exactly kind of can make the whale a possibility. And so that is really interesting to me. We haven't got a lot of that in a little bit. It's mainly in the first like 2 or 3 chapters, and I'm really hoping we get back to that soon because I'm really curious as to see what comes of that. I'm liking the book so far, hoping to get through more of it tonight, and maybe finish it tomorrow because, as I said, I've got 5 days left before it needs to go back to the library. A double book update for you. I've finished Mad Sisters of Essie over the weekend. I'm giving it 3 stars. It is, I didn't enjoy it as much as I thought I would. I think that it is really uniquely told. It really made me think about A Spear Cut Through Water. Both of them follow ancestry and really weave in the way a story is told into the story, and so it makes for a really unique read in that sense. We start off with those main two characters, Myung and Lala, and we learn about the whale that they are in. We learn about what it's like when Myung leaves the whale, the life that she leads, this island, this family that are kind of cursed to be stuck on this island, how they got there, and the history of how this island was created, and also the history of the whale as well. I think it was quite long, and I don't know if it needed to be as long as it was, and I just think that ultimately, because it weaved so many different stories together, we saw this one story and then we moved on to the next story and moved on to another story, and it all kind of came back around to explain things about our main characters and the situation that they were born into. But ultimately, I don't quite think it worked for me, but I read it, I finished it, it's another bingo square ticked off, and same for my other square, the short story collection square, because I also finished The Way Spring Arrives. I'm giving this collection 3.5, which is pretty general for most short story collections. There are obviously a range of different stories in here, some that I enjoyed more than others. A few that stick out, the one that I mentioned the other day about the baby and the game and everything that comes along with it. There's also one in here that is to do with dragon slaying, which you go into that with a certain perception of what is going to be there, and it was nothing like what I thought it was, and so I thought that one was told in a really interesting way as well. There are about 4 or 5 essays in here, some of them are linked directly to specific stories, and it's the translator talking about the choices that they made in translating the story. Others are just talking about science fiction and fantasy writing in general in China, and kind of trends and patterns. There's one towards the end that really focuses on kind of like the history of that and the terminology that's used, and it was a really nice cultural context for reading this collection of stories and kind of seeing the different themes that were weaved throughout them. It made me think about the fact that, to be honest, I don't think I've read too many books from Chinese authors, at least books that have been translated. I've read books from Chinese American authors, and so I'm definitely going to have a look and see if there's any other translations of works that authors in this collection have written, so that I can continue to kind of just read more widely from a range of different people from a range of different countries. I'm yet to start my next book. I have a few library holds that I need to read, but I'll check in with you when I do. I'm 40% of the way into A Song of Legends Lost. I need to make sure I get the title right, because I keep saying A Song for Legends Lost, A Song of Legends Lost, and I'm liking it so far. We are in a world where people have a connection to their ancestors, and there are specific people who are able to invoke the power of their ancestors, and so we follow a couple of different points of view. In the first part, we follow Temmie, who is what's classed as like a low blood, so someone who essentially is living in poverty. She and her family are bakers, but secretly on the side they're also using this technology called tech work, which is forbidden for them to have access to essentially just purify the water in their land, because it's obviously causing disruption. Drinking unclean water causes illness, causes disease, all of that sort of thing. So that's their under the table side job that they do. And at the beginning we know that something has happened to some of Temmie's family members, and people have found out that they are selling this tech work on the side, and so there is a situation there alongside someone who is working alongside Temmie to hopefully give her the strength to deal with the situation she's been faced with. And then we also have another point of view, Janelle, who is the middle child of one of these clan leaders, an invoker, and he is the only one of his siblings to not have been able to become an invoker. He hasn't been chosen by the ancestors. Essentially, I think every time someone dies, essentially, they are given the chance to go and essentially make their case to the ancestors for them to be granted the gift of their powers, and he has been rejected a lot of times, and so he kind of is, I don't want to say shouldn't, because he's not, but he is, you know, looked upon with pity. He fully does not believe this is ever going to happen to him. He decides to sneak into this battle that's going on with this creature, and something happens, something interesting happens, and kind of the ball rolling there in terms of what's going on with him, these powers or lack of powers and all of that. And then later on, as we move through the story and we learn more about different things for both these people, but especially in Janelle's kind of like family and the history of his family, we are starting to get some more points of view. A monk, so there is this order of monks that essentially is meant to research this tech work and bring it back to the palace for the palace to essentially have. No one is supposed to have access to this tech work, but obviously not everyone sticks to that. And we also have some other clan members as well. I can't, I guess, spoil too much in terms of revealing more points of view, reveals more of the story. But as I said, I'm 40% of the way through. I am enjoying the way it's written so far. I do think that sometimes some of the chapters were a little bit slower, but when you're switching through multiple points of view, there's probably going to be one that you find more interesting than the rest. I'm really enjoying Janae's point of view at the moment. He is a character who essentially is kind of been thrust into something that was very unexpected for him, and he doesn't quite know what to do with himself. There's a lot of family perception and stress of people around him putting their expectations on him that he essentially has not had to really think about because he wasn't chosen by his ancestors, but things change and he essentially needs to start stepping up and taking responsibility because his siblings are engaged in various other things as well. We haven't seen Temmie's point of view in a while, and I think from the contents at the beginning, from what I remember, it looks like that we might go back to that at some point in the future. So I am kind of curious as to what's going to happen in the meantime before we go back to Temmie and where we left her, because we left her in quite a sudden ending to what was going on. That's my brief overview. It's Blue Monday today. If you look too close, you'll see the massive bags under my eyes because January is such a long month. It's the world's longest month. I feel sorry for any Capricorns and Aquariuses born in January. It's too long. Anyway, I finished A Song of Legends Lost. I never tend to go for like 0.25 or 0.75 stars, but I feel like this is a 3.75. I think that it's a nice story. I enjoyed the world building. I think that it has potential, but I think that it felt a little bit long in places, and I don't think that all the points of view that we saw were the most interesting. Yes, they all led to a point, and at the end we have got to a point where things are set up for book 2, which I know comes out this year. I'm going to read book 2 and I think I'll make my decision then. I don't know if it's a duology or a trilogy. I think it's a trilogy. From that point forward, whether I would continue and finish a series. I feel like if you read the second book, I mean, you don't have to, I might hate it, but I'm curious enough to continue. And I thought the book was strong, but it had its weaknesses where it didn't quite make it a 4-star for me. So that is a book with a generic title ticked off. I also have started on the train today, oh my god, A Teller of Small Fortunes for the Cozy SFF Square. I managed to get 40% of the way through. It's really turned out to be quite a quick read. I think that it's written fine, and there are some bits in it that feel kind of a little bit obvious at times in terms of like the way the storytelling is, but I think that I'm going to breeze through it. I did manage to finish The Teller of Small Fortunes. I am giving it 3 stars. I think that it was a really easy read. The writing felt really easily consumable. I do think that sometimes the plot felt a little bit oversimplified. We have our main character Tao. She is a teller of small fortunes. She does have the power to tell larger fortunes, but for her own personal reasons she decided she didn't want to do that, and that plays a large part of the story. And then we also have the people that she meets and that she kind of supports by giving them their small fortunes. We have Mash and Sil, who are 2 mercenary adventurer kind of guys. Mash is looking for his lost daughter, and we also have Kina, who is a baker and who decides to kind of branch out and go along with them on the road. Overall, the kind of overarching story point is that Mash wants to find his daughter. She's super young. They think that she was taken by bandits, and ultimately a lot of the actions in the book are driven because they want to be able to support him in finding his daughter and bringing Leah back home. But there are so many other things that are also going on. Tao's own relationship with her heritage. She is a Shin. The Shin people aren't treated the same way that other people are in the nation that they're in. There is suspicion and rumour and unfounded things about war that are going on as well, and so that plays a large part in her own personal identity, but then also her thoughts around fortune telling, giving people fortunes, the Mages Guild that exists and why she doesn't want to be a part of that. And that overarching story is the main part because Tao is our main character, and so the story really does focus on her and her own feelings and relationships and heritage and all of that, and then the finding Mash's daughter side plot is also there. I think if you're looking for a light, cosy read, I think it fits. There are obviously questions in there to do with, you know, identity, family, a minor bit of adventuring, but ultimately the stakes aren't super high. There is a kind of like threat of potential war in the background, but ultimately it doesn't really come to fruition. I think I will maybe have a look at Julie Leong's next book that comes out. It is meant to be a sapphic romance that's set in the same world, I believe, as I think that when I'm looking for a light read, this is a sort of book that I would reach for. And also I put it off for so long. I literally started the first chapter of this months ago in the hopes that I would be able to read it and tick off another square for bingo, and then I just never continued. But I'm glad that I finally did and I got through it. And that brings me to the end of this video. I am 5 books up on my bingo, which I believe leaves me with 6 squares left, but 5 more books to read. I've got my not a bingo square that I will do, and then I have 5 other books to read. But I have a feeling now that I've got the ball rolling, it'll be fairly easy for me to get through the rest of those, because we are only on the 20th of January today, which means I have more than 2 months, just about, to finish the rest of the bingo. If you're reading for bingo, let me know what squares that you've enjoyed, and I of course will see you with another bingo video in April, because it's my favourite time of the year. The ceremonial unveiling of the bingo board is iconic. So I'll see you in my next video.